When the lawyer handed over the deed, it felt like a sick joke. Her siblings inherited the sprawling estates and the millions, while Aurora got a 300-square-foot wedge of mud. But nobody knew that beneath that worthless dirt lay a secret that would turn their entire family upside down. The air inside attorney Richard Harrison's downtown Denver office smelled heavily of lemon polish old paper and the expensive cloying cologne worn by Aurora's older brother Leonard. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, weeping shadows across the mahogany conference table. Aurora May sat perfectly still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She wore a faded navy blue trench coat that had seen at least 6 Colorado winters, a stark contrast to the tailored Italian suit Leonard wore, or the blinding diamond tennis bracelet practically suffocating her sister Zoe's wrist. Their father, Thomas May, had been a complex man, a retired structural engineer who spent his life building bridges and bank vaults across the Pacific Northwest. Thomas was known for his sharp mind, and in his later years, an intense, almost suffocating paranoia. But when the dementia finally took hold, it was Aurora and only Aurora who stepped up. While Leonard was busy expanding his logistics empire, and Zoe was wintering in Aspen with her investment banker husband, Aurora had moved their father into her cramped 2-bedroom apartment. For 3 years, Aurora bathed him. She fed him. She listened to his endless, fragmented ramblings about the heavy earth, the buried foundation, and the rainy day fund. She had sacrificed her savings, her free time, and nearly her sanity, all while still paying off the crushing mountain of medical debt left behind by her late husband, David. She wasn't looking for a medal, but she had expected fairness. Attorney Harrison cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Now onto the distribution of the primary assets. To Leonard May Thomas leaves the 400-acre ranch property in Boulder County, fully paid off alongside the commercial real estate portfolio. Leonard didn't even blink. He just casually adjusted his silk tie. To Zoe Miller, Harrison continued turning a crisp parchment page. Thomas leaves the entirety of his liquid assets, including the mutual funds, the offshore accounts, and the family trust totaling approximately $4.2 million. Zoe let out a soft, theatrical sigh, pretending the number was a burden, though the corners of her mouth twitched upward in a greedy smirk. Aurora's heart began to pound against her ribs. That was the ranch. That was the cash. What was left? Her father had been wealthy, yes, but surely there was something for her. Enough to pay off David's hospital bills. Enough to finally stop the collection agencies from calling her phone at 6 in the morning. Harrison looked up, his eyes meeting Aurora's. For a fleeting second, Aurora saw something behind the lawyer's professional veneer. It looked agonizingly like pity. And finally to his youngest daughter, Aurora May. Harrison said, his voice dropping half an octave. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single thin manila envelope, sliding it across the polished mahogany. Thomas leaves the deed to parcel 42B, located in the municipality of Silver Plume. Aurora stared at the envelope. She didn't reach for it. Parcel 42B, she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain hitting the glass. What is that? A house, a cabin. Leonard let out a sharp, barking laugh. A cabin, oh, Aurora. It's a dirt patch. Zoe leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malicious amusement. Dad bought it in the 80s for some municipal tax write-off. I saw the appraisal report last week. It's a wedge of dirt behind an old diner. It's not even zoned for residential building. It's essentially a ditch. That can't be right, Aurora said, her voice trembling. She looked at the lawyer, desperate for a correction. Richard, please. I took care of him. I fed him when he couldn't hold a spoon. He wouldn't do this. He told me he was going to make sure I was taken care of." Harrison offered a tight, sympathetic grimace. "I am deeply sorry, Aurora. Your father drafted this specific addendum 6 months ago. He was adamant. The ranch to Leonard, the trust to Zoe and parcel, 42B to you." His exact words documented here were, "Aurora has the grit to understand the value of the ground beneath her feet." "The value of the ground," Aurora repeated the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. "Well, you can always pave it and rent it out as a parking space," Zoe chimed in, checking her reflection in her phone screen. "Or sell it to the city. I think the appraisal put it at about $600. $600. Aurora's vision blurred. The walls of the office seemed to close in. The debt, the exhaustion, the years of changing adult diapers, and waking up at 3 a.m. to soothe a terrified, confused old man, all of it rewarded with a useless wedge of mud. She grabbed the envelope, her hands shaking uncontrollably, and stood up. Without a word to her siblings or the lawyer, she walked out of the office, stepping into the biting Denver rain. 2 days later, desperation drove Aurora up Interstate 70 into the mountains. She had to see it. She had to know if there was some mistake, some hidden value to the land. She parked her sputtering 2008 Honda Civic on the shoulder of a crumbling road at the edge of Silver Plume, an old, quiet mining town. She stood before parcel 42B. Zoe hadn't been exaggerating. If anything, she had been generous. It was a jagged, irregular triangle of land measuring roughly 300 square feet. On the left side, it was bordered by the rusted razor-wire-topped fence of Jenkins Auto Body. On the right, it sharply dropped off into a concrete municipal storm drain. The plot itself was nothing but compacted rocky dirt, dead weeds, and a single rotting oak stump. It was a dumping ground. Someone had tossed a broken microwave and a set of bald tires onto the property. Aurora walked into the adjacent auto body shop, hoping against hope. The owner, a burly man named Gary Jenkins, came out wiping grease from his hands. "Mr. Jenkins," Aurora said, putting on her most polite, professional teacher's voice. "I recently inherited the small lot next to your fence. I was wondering if you had any interest in purchasing it. Perhaps to expand your scrapyard." Gary looked past her at the depressing wedge of dirt and snorted. "Lady, I wouldn't take that liability if you paid me. That land is on a steep grade. The retaining wall by the storm drain is crumbling. One good rainstorm and that whole dirt pile is sliding right into the city sewer. When that happens, the city is going to fine whoever owns it for the cleanup. You're better off abandoning it." Aurora walked back to her car, the cold mountain wind biting through her thin coat. She gripped the steering wheel, finally allowing the tears to fall. Her father hadn't just left her nothing. He had left her a financial trap. It was the ultimate insult. 2 weeks passed. Aurora's life continued its downward spiral. The bank sent a final notice regarding the mortgage on her apartment. She was living on ramen noodles and instant coffee, working extra shifts, tutoring just to keep the lights on. Then the final blow arrived in the form of a certified letter from the Silver Plume Municipal Office. Aurora sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the official city letterhead. The words swam before her exhausted eyes. Notice of Municipal Code Violation. Property Parcel 42. B. Issue. Severe soil erosion, threatening public infrastructure. The makeshift retaining timber on your property has collapsed. You are required to secure the soil and clear the drainage pathway within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in a $500 daily fine and a lien placed against any other assets in your name. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in Aurora's throat. A lien against her assets. What assets? Her decade-old Honda. She didn't have the money to hire a contractor. The lowest quote she got over the phone, just to haul away the debris and drop some gravel, was $1,500. She had exactly $84 in her checking account. There was only one option. She had to do it herself. That Friday night, Aurora borrowed a heavy iron pickaxe, a flathead shovel, and a wheelbarrow from the school's janitor. She drove up to Silver Plume before dawn on Saturday morning. The weather forecast had warned of a severe spring squall moving in from the Pacific Northwest, predicting historic rainfall for the region. Aurora didn't care. She had a deadline. By 7 a.m., the sky over the mountains turned the color of bruised iron. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and pine. Aurora pulled a cheap, bright yellow plastic poncho over her head, tied her hair back, and went to work. The first hour was brutal. The earth was compacted like concrete, filled with jagged quartz rocks and generations of trash. She hauled away the broken microwave. She dragged the rotting tires to the curb. Every swing of the pickaxe sent a jarring shock up her arms, vibrating deep into her shoulders. Her hands, unaccustomed to manual labor, immediately began to blister. At 8:30 a.m., the sky broke open. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge. Water fell in thick, blinding sheets, instantly turning the dust of Parcel 42B into a slick, treacherous slip and slide of mud. The temperature plummeted, and the freezing rain plastered Aurora's hair to her face, seeping down her collar. Gary Jenkins had been right. As the rain battered the exposed plot, the dirt quickly began to liquefy. A river of brown sludge started moving relentlessly toward the municipal storm drain at the bottom of the slope. If that drain clogged the city, would make good on their $500 a day threat. "No, no, no!" Aurora screamed into the roaring wind, wiping mud from her eyes. She scrambled down the slope, her boots slipping, dropping to her knees in the freezing muck. She grabbed her shovel and began digging furiously, trying to carve a diversion trench parallel to the drain to catch the mud before it spilled over the concrete lip. The rain was so loud it sounded like a jet engine. Aurora was sobbing now, tears mixing with the freezing rain. This was her father's legacy. This was her reward for her loyalty. Digging in the mud like an animal while her brother drank scotch in his mansion. She swung the shovel down hard into the mud to deepen the trench. Clang. The sound was sharp, metallic, and completely out of place. It wasn't the dull thud of striking a buried rock. It sounded hollow, resonant. Aurora froze, wiping her dripping face with a mud-caked sleeve. She looked down into the dark brown slurry. She repositioned the shovel and drove it down again a few inches to the left. Clang. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. She threw the shovel aside and dropped onto her hands and knees in the pooling water. She dug with her bare, blistered hands, clawing through the freezing mud, tearing away rocks and rotting roots. About 2 feet down, her fingernails scraped against something smooth, hard, and unmistakably man-made. She kept digging the rain, helping to wash the mud away as she cleared the object. It was a box. A massive, heavy military-style metal lock box, about the size of a large suitcase, buried deep within the slope. It was coated in years of rust, and packed in a layer of heavy waterproof industrial grease that had mostly hardened into a waxy shell over the decades. Aurora's breath hitched in her throat. Thomas spent his life building bank vaults, she remembered suddenly. He knew how to hide things. He knew how to protect things. The value of the ground beneath your feet. She whispered the lawyer's words, echoing in her mind. She grabbed her pickaxe, wedging the sharp tip under the thick, rusted padlock that held the box shut. She leveraged her entire body weight against the heavy wooden handle. She slipped in the mud once, slamming her hip against the box, but she scrambled back up. She heaved with everything she had. With a harsh, snapping sound, the rusted lock gave way. Aurora fell backward into the mud, panting heavily. The storm raged around her, thunder rattling the old tin roof of the auto shop next door. Slowly she crawled back to the box. She grabbed the heavy metal lid, and with an agonizing groan of rusted hinges, pulled it open. Inside, beneath a layer of degrading, mouldy canvas oilcloth, were perfectly stacked rows of objects wrapped in thick wax paper. Aurora reached out with a trembling hand. She pulled one of the rectangular packages free. It was shockingly heavy, far heavier than a brick of its size should be. It nearly slipped from her wet, freezing fingers. She tore at the wax paper, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The rain washed the last bits of paper away, revealing the dull, mesmerizing gleam of yellow metal. It was a solid gold bar. Aurora gasped, dropping it back into the box in sheer shock. It landed against the other bars with a heavy, unmistakable clinking sound. There had to be at least 40 bars in the lockbox. Millions of dollars. Buried right here in the dirt. But as she stared down at the fortune, a cold sense of dread began to pool in her stomach, eclipsing her initial euphoria. She reached down and picked the bar up again, turning it over in the dim, stormy light. She wiped the grime from the surface. These weren't standard bullion bars you could buy from a broker. They were old. Very old. And stamped directly into the center of the gold was a chilling insignia. The emblem of the Denver Federal Reserve, dated 1973. Aurora felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered the news clippings her father used to keep in his study. The great unsolved Denver Reserve heist of '73, an inside job where $3 million in gold vanished from a vault her father's engineering firm had contracted to repair. The case had been cold for 50 years. Her father hadn't left her a treasure. He had left her the loot from a federal crime. Suddenly, a blinding light cut through the sheet of rain sweeping across the mud and illuminating Aurora kneeling over the gold. Aurora shielded her eyes. Through the downpour she saw a sleek black SUV pulling off the road, stopping directly in front of parcel 42B. The engine idled with a low, menacing purr. The driver's side door opened, and a tall man stepped out into the storm. He didn't rush. He didn't run for cover. He casually opened a large black umbrella and stood by the chain-link fence, his gaze locked directly on Aurora and the open box of gold gleaming in the mud at her feet. The man standing under the black umbrella didn't look like a police officer. He wore a heavy, charcoal-grey wool overcoat that fell to his knees, and his face was a landscape of deep, weathered lines, hardened by decades of stress. He had the unmistakable posture of a predator who had finally cornered a long-sought prey. Aurora's muscles locked in terror, her hand still smeared with freezing mud, and clutching the stolen gold bar trembled violently. The man stepped off the pavement and onto the muddy slope of parcel 42B. He closed the umbrella, letting the torrential rain soak his grey hair, and casually tossed it aside. From the deep pocket of his coat, he withdrew a snub-nosed revolver, the dark metal slick with rain. "Put it back in the box, Aurora," he said. His voice was gravelly, barely audible over the roaring storm, but it carried an undeniable authority. "Who are you?" Aurora yelled back slowly, lowering the gold bar into the rusted lockbox. "How do you know my name?" "My name is Gregory Shaw," the man replied, taking another step down the slick, deteriorating grade. "Until 5 years ago, I was a senior investigator with the Denver FBI field office. I spent 30 years staring at your father's file, Aurora. 30 years trying to prove that Thomas May used his structural engineering firm to bypass the seismic sensors on the reserve vault." Aurora's heart plummeted. "My father was a good man. He was sick. He He was a genius. Shaw interrupted, his eyes locked on the gleaming yellow metal inside the box. He designed the very vault they hit. The official report said a crew of professional tunnelers pulled off the heist, but the math never added up. The structural supports were bypassed from the inside. Thomas was the only man alive who knew those schematics. But he was smart. He never spent a dime of it. He lived a modest, quiet life. He never slipped up. When he got sick, I thought the secret was going to the grave with him. Shaw smiled a thin, cruel expression. But I knew he couldn't resist leaving it to someone. I've been watching your brother Leonard and your sister Zoe for months. I tapped their phones. I tracked their cars. But they were just greedy fools. It was you, the quiet, loyal daughter taking the garbage plot of land. I knew it the moment I saw the deed transfer. You're not with the FBI anymore, Aurora deduced, her mind racing. You're here to steal it for yourself. A pension doesn't stretch very far these days, Aurora, Shaw said, leveling the revolver directly at her chest. Now step away from the box. Move over to the fence. Aurora looked at the gun, then down at the box, and finally at the surrounding terrain. The deluge was worsening. The trench she had dug earlier was overflowing, and the ground beneath her boots felt sickeningly soft, like walking on a wet sponge. The crumbling, rotted timber of the old retaining wall, holding back the slope from the storm drain, was buckling under the immense weight of the liquefied earth. Gary Jenkins's warning echoed in her ears. One good rainstorm, and that whole dirt pile is sliding right into the city sewer. Aurora slowly backed away from the lockbox, raising her hands. She took small, deliberate steps toward the left side of the plot, edging closer to the rusted fence of the auto body shop. Shaw kept the gun trained on her as he moved forward, his eyes intoxicated by the sight of the gold. He stepped squarely into the center of the muddy plot right beside the lockbox, his heavy leather boots sinking inches into the mire. $3 million in 1973. Shaw muttered to himself, almost in a trance. Adjusted for inflation and current gold prices, this is worth over $20 million today. It's heavy, Aurora yelled over a crack of thunder. You won't be able to carry it all to your car. I'll manage, Shaw sneered. He knelt down in the mud, momentarily taking one hand off the gun to reach into the box. It was the only opening she was going to get. Aurora didn't run toward Shaw. She dove toward the bottom of the slope. She grabbed the heavy iron pickaxe she had tossed aside earlier. With a feral scream, fueled by years of exhaustion, betrayal, and pure adrenaline, Aurora swung the pickaxe with every ounce of strength she had left. She didn't aim for Shaw. She aimed for the rotting, waterlogged timber of the retaining wall. The heavy iron tip smashed into the compromised wood. There was a deafening crack that sounded like a gunshot. The structural integrity of the wall already pushed to the absolute brink by the torrential floodwaters shattered. "What are you doing?" Shaw roared, jumping to his feet and raising the gun. But it was too late. The earth gave way. With a sickening deep groan, the entire 300-square-foot wedge of parcel 42B liquefied. A massive wave of heavy rocky mud debris and freezing water surged downward, instantly transforming the slope into a violent, unstoppable landslide. Shaw fired a shot, but the bullet went wild into the air as the ground quite literally vanished beneath his feet. He screamed as the river of mud swept him backward, dragging him violently down the slope. Aurora clung desperately to the chain-link fence of the auto shop, the rusted metal cutting into her palms as the mud tore at her boots, trying to drag her down with it. She watched in horror and awe as the mudslide carried Shaw, his umbrella, and hundreds of pounds of debris straight over the concrete edge and directly into the gaping mouth of the municipal storm drain. The heavy lockbox of gold caught in the violent churn tumbled down the slope, slamming against a large concrete pylon at the edge of the drain before settling deep into the thick, settling sludge. Then, just as quickly as it started, the landslide stopped. The lot was entirely gone, replaced by a steep, raw crater of exposed bedrock. Aurora hung from the fence, gasping for air, her whole body shaking violently. Below her at the mouth of the drain, Shaw was groaning, buried up to his waist in thick, immovable mud, completely trapped and disarmed. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the diminishing rain. Gary Jenkins had heard the gunshot and the collapse, and had immediately called 911. Aurora slid down the remaining muddy bank, her legs trembling. She completely ignored Shaw, who was struggling and cursing weakly in the drain. She made her way to the heavy metal lockbox. It had been battered, but the lid was still open. The gold bars were covered in grime, but they remained stacked inside. As Aurora reached in to secure the heavy canvas oilcloth over the gold, before the police arrived, her fingers brushed against something taped to the very bottom of the box, completely hidden beneath the bottom layer of gold. It was a thick, yellowed envelope, sealed in heavy waterproof plastic. She ripped it free and tore it open. Inside was a bundle of documents, some old photographs, and a letter written on her father's personal stationery. The handwriting was sharp and precise, the way her father wrote before the dementia had stolen his mind. Aurora read the first few lines, and the breath left her lungs. To my Aurora, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have proven that you have the perseverance I always knew you possessed. I left you this cursed dirt not to punish you, but to protect you. The gold in this box is stolen. But I didn't steal it. Aurora read on her eyes, widening with every paragraph. The letter detailed the 73 heist. Her father had indeed designed the vault, but the men who bypassed the censors and stole the gold weren't strangers. The operation was masterminded and funded by a young, ruthless real estate developer named William Miller. William Miller was Zoe's father-in-law. Miller had discovered a critical flaw in the vault's concrete curing process. He blackmailed Thomas, threatening to kill Thomas's young wife and children if he didn't provide the schematics. After the heist, Miller forced Thomas to hide a portion of the gold, the hot bars stamped with the reserve insignia that were impossible to fence until the heat died down. Thomas had buried them under the worthless parcel of land in Silver Plume, terrified for his family's lives. But Thomas was a meticulous engineer. He kept the receipts. The envelope contained original blueprints, signed affidavits, financial wire transfers, and audio transcripts linking William Miller directly to the organized crime syndicate that pulled off the heist. Furthermore, it contained undeniable proof that Miller had used the laundered portion of the stolen gold to establish the Miller Investment Bank, the very bank that Leonard used to fund his logistics empire, and the source of Zoe's lavish lifestyle. I was a coward, Aurora, the letter concluded. I was too afraid of Miller to go to the authorities. But William Miller is dead now, and the statute of limitations on the theft has not expired for the corporation he built with blood money. Under the Federal Whistleblower Reward Act, anyone who provides evidence leading to the recovery of stolen federal assets and the prosecution of the offending financial institutions is entitled to a reward of up to 15% of the recovered value and levied fines. I leave you this box, not for the gold, Aurora. The gold belongs to the government. I leave you the truth. Use it to rebuild your life. Love, Dad. Freeze, step away from the box. Aurora looked up. 3 Silver Plume police cruisers had skidded to a halt on the road above. Officers were pouring out weapons drawn, shining, blinding tactical flashlights down into the muddy crater. Aurora didn't panic. For the first time in years, she felt an overwhelming sense of calm. She carefully folded the letter and the evidence, placing them securely inside her soaked trench coat pocket. She stood up, raised her hands, and looked directly into the blinding lights. "Officers!" Aurora yelled, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Aurora May. I need you to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately. I have recovered property belonging to the United States government, and I have evidence of a multi-million-dollar financial conspiracy." 6 months later, the business world was rocked by the largest financial scandal of the decade. The FBI raid on the Miller Investment Bank was broadcast live on every major news network. The evidence Thomas May had buried in the mud was airtight. Zoe's husband was arrested on federal racketeering and money laundering charges, and the bank's assets were entirely frozen and seized by the federal government. Leonard May didn't fare much better. The investigation revealed that his logistics empire had been deeply intertwined with the Miller Bank's illicit funds. His properties, including the prized 400-acre Boulder Ranch, were seized in the federal asset forfeiture sweep. Both Leonard and Zoe were left utterly penniless, facing years of grueling legal battles. Gregory Shaw was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for attempted armed robbery and assault. As for Aurora, she never saw the gold bars again. They were quietly transported back to the Denver Federal Reserve. But 3 months after the trial concluded, she received a certified letter from the Department of Justice. The whistleblower reward, calculated from the recovered gold, and the massive federal fines levied against the Miller estate totaled exactly $14.2 million. Clean legal and entirely hers. Aurora stood on the balcony of her new spacious townhouse in the foothills of the Rockies. The sun was shining brightly, reflecting off the pristine mountain snow. She took a sip of her coffee, looking out over the landscape. Her debts were paid. Her life was finally her own. Her father had been right all along. She had found the true value of the ground beneath her feet, and it had provided a foundation that no storm could ever wash away. If you loved this story of karma, hidden secrets, and ultimate justice, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to support our channel. Share this incredible tale with your friends who love a good plot twist, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another thrilling real-life drama. See you in the next video.